All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the Current. This is the North Central Region Water Network's monthly webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about the topic, a closer look at nitrate leaching. For those of you who may not be familiar with the North Central Region Water Network, we are a multi-state extension-led collaboration working to ensure safe and sufficient water resources across the North Central region and increase the scope and positive work of extension. This webinar series, we've been doing it for over 8 years now. Each month we focus on a water-related topic, and we take feature 3 different presentations on that topic. And today we're going to be talking about nitrate leaching. A couple housekeeping items for you. This is on Zoom webinar, so you are all muted at the moment. We will be having questions following our 3 presenters, and those questions will really be taken from the Q&A panel. So please take a moment and locate that at the bottom of your screen. Also, on those questions, you can upvote other questions that folks may have that you also have. So we'll take those questions that are most interesting or most upvoted first. We will have the Q&A after all 3 of our presenters have spoken today. If you have any technical issues, or if you want to provide any links or any introductions to folks, you can do that in the chat. The chat is really for discussion, where the Q&A is for panelist questions. Also, if you're having any technical issues, you can use the phone if you click on the up arrow on the mute icon and then click switch to phone. This session is being recorded, and we will put the recording up on our website, northcentralwater.org. There you can find our archive with over 100 different The Current webinar series recordings. All right, let's jump in. So today we're going to be talking about nitrate leaching, and we're going to be featuring 3 different presentations. First, we're going to be looking a little bit on a background of the state of nitrate leaching, as well as a systematic approach from Dr. Javid Iqbal with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Then Nathan Slipke is going to be sharing some research on the connection between nitrate leaching, cover crops, and biomass. Lastly, we're going to be featuring Gulong Leon, who's going to be talking about a nitrate leaching calculator that you can use when working with producers. So excited to have all 3 here today to share a little bit about their work. First up is Dr. Javid Iqbal. As I mentioned, he's an assistant professor with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, specializing in soil nutrient management and water quality. I'll let you read his full bio here, and I will stop sharing and hand it over to Javid.
Okay, can you see it?
That's
The
great.
slides? And okay. All right. Thanks for giving me this opportunity. So today we are going to share about nitrate leaching, and we all know that nitrate leaching is a persistent challenge in our agriculture that impacts soil quality, water quality, and crop productivity. But what if we can approach it from a broader and integrated perspective? So I will be sharing a more kind of systems approach to reduce nitrate leaching, and will share an example out of those practices from my research. So before we jump into that, okay, let me go back. Okay, it's working. All right. So before I share that, I want to show you this, states map with areas at risk of nitrate contamination to shallow groundwater. So you can see that this kind of, states with the risk of nitrate contamination resembles to, nitrate violations. These nitrate violations resemble to America's areas with the more farm value. For example, you can see from the Panhandle in Texas to all the way to North Dakota, and then from western Nebraska through Iowa to all the way to even Pennsylvania. So representing nitrate violations in these states with the farm in the farm region. But among all of those states, you can see that Nebraska state is at the risk of at a higher risk of nitrate contamination compared to even all other states. This is because Nebraska is a leading state, the state with the leading crop irrigation acres. So when we look within the state of Nebraska, so you can see that these nitrate concentration in the groundwater, they vary among townships, with some townships even reaching up to 100 parts per million, which is way above the EPA drinking water limit. So the primary source of this nitrate contamination is the fertilizer, which we are seeing mostly in sandy soils or area with shallow groundwater table or irrigated acres. So this nitrate contamination not only is a loss for the fertilizer for the farmer, but it is also impacting the community, as we are seeing the increasing cases of pediatric cancer and blue baby syndrome and other diseases. Those are related to nitrate contamination into the groundwater. So we definitely need a more kind of robust approach to treat this nitrate contamination or to reduce this nitrate contamination. Whenever I tell about those, that approach, I would say that it is a kind of systems approach where there are a huge list of BMPs. Among those, 4 R's nutrient stewardship with the right source, rate, time, and place is most the fundamental or vital concept within that system that really can help to optimize the nitrogen management and reduce the nitrate leaching with these 4 rights. So in addition, there are conservation practices that can help to reduce nitrate leaching and improve nitrogen use efficiency. For example, properly crediting nitrogen from the manure, including alfalfa in rotation, proper irrigation scheduling, crop rotation, no tillage, and including cover crop are some of those conservation practices that can help to reduce nitrate leaching or improve nitrogen use efficiency. Overall, I would say that we really need a more kind of integrated nutrient management approach to reduce nitrate leaching across all throughout the year, whether it's season or off season. So, among these different management practices, I have conducted several trials that addresses each of those practices. But today, I'm just going to share with you an example from the right source of nitrogen fertilizer, which is often overlooked. So when I talk about the right source, we can talk about a lot of right nitrogen sources, but recently there have been more, focus on the use of enhanced efficiency nitrogen fertilizer. These are the fertilizer that slows down the nitrogen release and reduces the urease activity or nitrification activity and helps to synchronize nitrogen in a better way with the crop nitrogen uptake. So we conducted this one study to see if these enhanced efficiency fertilizer can help us to reduce nitrate leaching while maintaining corn yield, and especially in the nitrate contaminated area that was irrigated loamy sand at our study. So we were looking to answer questions: how effective these enhanced efficiency fertilizers can be to improve nitrogen use efficiency and reduce nitrate leaching and improve water quality. And this is the question that we are often getting from the producers. Are these enhanced efficiency fertilizer providing economic benefits to the farmers? So these are the questions that we were looking to address in this study. So this study, among many other studies, was located in northeast Nebraska. So it was a basil groundwater management area where we collaborated with 4 NRDs in that area. And this was the area where the nitrate contamination in the groundwater was about 20 parts per million. So we were looking to see if we can use these enhanced efficiency fertilizers to reduce nitrate leaching. So we use 3 nitrogen fertilizer sources here: urea, super U. So super U has both NPPT, that is a urease inhibitor, and DCD, it is active ingredient for nitrification inhibitor, and then agrotane that contains DCD, that is a nitrification inhibitor. So we tested these three nitrogen fertilizer sources with two timings. So all of those were applied upfront as pre-planned, or we split them into five splits. So that these sources provided a base rate of 70 pounds earlier, and then we used UAN for side dress and for fertigation. And then we conducted these treatments with two nitrogen rates. One was optimum nitrogen rate, but that was 225 pounds nitrogen per acre for this specific site. And then the suboptimum nitrogen rate, that was 180 pounds nitrogen per acre. So my team is here. They are installing the suction cup lysimeter at 4 feet depth, and they are collecting water samples. So we installed a lot of these lysimeters in these plots where we were collecting water samples, two times or three times a week during the growing season. So here I will share the results. So this slide shows the temporal variability and nitrate leaching. So these are the nitrate leaching in milligram per liter from the water sample that we collected from those lysimeters and those treatments. So here there are a lot of treatments that probably I don't want to cover because you cannot see the differences between those treatments here. But what I want to show you here, so when we started, this season, for example, we conducted this for two seasons, but especially in this season, we did not see a higher nitrate leaching at the start of the study because we did not get much precipitation. And then, but when UAN was side dressed, as you can see in June, there was a huge spike of nitrate leaching, and especially this was from UAN that was side dressed, and that was a 5 nitrogen split with just urea. So we applied urea and then side dress UAN and 3 fertigation. But this kind of shows that even when we are doing split application, there is a huge risk of nitrate leaching. So this was this blue triangles, those are showing from the treatment, which was a conventional nitrogen split, 5 times split. But still, after UAN side dressing, we saw a huge peak of nitrate leaching. But you will notice that from all other treatments, especially from the treatments that where we used 100% inhibitor, especially at the start of the study or at pre-plan, there were lower nitrate concentration from those inhibitors throughout this growing season. So during all of these stages that you're seeing here. Okay, so we have a lot of data actually from this study, a lot of combination, but I just want to summarize this in one slide here. So here I'm comparing the optimum nitrogen rate, or what I will say with the conventional nitrogen split that was and a conventional nitrogen source. So this was a 5 times split, the what we call conventional nitrogen management in that area. And then I'm comparing this with the inhibitor at suboptimal nitrogen rate that was 180 pounds nitrogen per acre. That's what we call suboptimal nitrogen rate. So all of that with the suboptimal nitrogen rate, all of that inhibitor was, applied upfront. So what you can see here in these graphs, there are 4 site years, there are 2 products, agrotane on the left panels and super U on the right panel. So what you can see that once we reduced, we use optimum nitrogen rate, we reduced nitrogen by 20 to 22%. That was about that was about 40 to 45 pounds nitrogen per acre. But using those both sources, we reduced this rate, but we did not see any impact on crop shield. It was statistically the same between optimum nitrogen rate with the conventional nitrogen source versus suboptimum nitrogen rate with either agrotane, as you can see on the left panel, and the super U on the right panel. So not only that, the nitrate leaching that we had from those lysimeters, it was significantly lower from the inhibitor treatments with the suboptimal nitrogen rate, you can see all across all those four site years, there was about 41% to 66%, less nitrate leaching with those inhibitors. So kind of showing that though we are in our region, we are encouraging the producers to use in-season nitrogen with multiple nitrogen splits, but we definitely also need to see how those nitrogen splits are, applied. For example, UAN, as you have seen in the previous slides, there was a peak of UAN after side dressing, while all the nitrogen that was applied all upfront with the inhibitor had the lower nitrate leaching, as we are seeing in this study. So overall, I would say that it is a nitrate leaching is a persistent challenge that we may not be able to deal with one specific management practice, but we probably need a more broader and integrated approach to address this challenge. And we need to use those 4 Rs concept and those conservation practices to provide a kind of additive effect in conserving nitrogen or reducing nitrate leaching while improving nitrogen use efficiency in the cropping system. So we have conducted so many other studies too. We are not seeing the consistent effects of enhanced efficiency fertilizer at all different rates, but what we have found that these are more effective at suboptimal nitrogen rates, and especially when you are applying those for pre-plant nitrogen application. So I would say that enhanced efficiency fertilizer, based on my other studies, they do not perform well at optimal nitrogen rates, but they perform well at suboptimal nitrogen rate. So using these enhanced efficiency fertilizer with DCD or NPPT active ingredients, I would say that can has the potential to reduce nitrate leaching without impacting corn yield, but increasing profitability while reducing nitrate leaching into the groundwater. So with this, I would end my presentation, and then I would be happy to take questions probably at the end.
Perfect. Thank you so much, David. All right. Next, we're going to hear from Nathan Zedke. Nathan is outside of the North Central region. He actually comes to us from Virginia Cooperative Extension, where he works on agricultural and natural resources, specifically soil health, cover crops, water quality, and nitrogen cycling. So I'm excited to feature Nathan. He's going to talk about a study he recently did connecting or better understanding the relationship between nitrate leaching, cover crops, and biomass. Nathan, I will hand it over to you.
It says I have to request to share my screen.
You should be able to now. I've stopped now.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for the invite and for the introduction, Anne. So I'm going to talk to you guys about some work that I did for my PhD dissertation at University of Maryland, relating the importance of cover crop biomass to nitrate leaching. Like Ann said, I'm from a different region than you guys. All the work I've done on cover crops has been from the Mid-Atlantic region, either Virginia or Maryland. So in the Mid-Atlantic region, cover cropping is probably a bit different than you're used to. And cover crops do very well where I'm from. Part of that is because we have fairly mild winters and we have consistent rainfall. Normally, we can expect rainfall every month, so that helps with cover crop germination. Most cover crops in our area are planted after corn or soybean harvest in the fall. So you're usually talking about October, maybe as late as early November. Cover crops are very common here because both Maryland and the Virginia Departments of Agriculture pay farmers to plant cover crops. This year, if you hit all the incentives, you can get as much as $90 an acre for planting cover crops. This is part of the goal to reduce the amount of nitrogen that's leached in order to protect water quality in the Chesapeake Bay. Nitrogen leaching occurs mainly during the winter of what we have as our primary leaching season. So, Javid was talking about irrigated fields in the mid-Atlantic. We have consistent enough rainfall. We normally don't have irrigated fields. So our leaching season occurs mainly when precipitation exceeds the amount of water that's used up by the crops, when it exceeds evapotranspiration. So just to demonstrate that, I've taken this image from the Staver and Brinsfield paper. So our leaching season is normally between November and April, sometimes as late as May. This is where the water table actually is able to flush. The water table rises and leaching occurs. Nitrogen gets dissolved and leaches away. So the cover crop effects on the amount of nitrate leaching losses are determined while the cover crops are actively growing in the fall before they go dormant. Okay, so just an overview of cover crops and nitrate leaching. Nitrate is a problem not just because of, it has a potential to harm water quality, but a big reason why it's the one that we're most concerned about when it comes to leaching is that it's incredibly soluble in water. You could expect that if water is moving through a soil, it's probably taking nitrate with it. So the mechanism by which cover crops reduce the amount of nitrate leached. So nitrate accumulates in the soil as organic matter decomposes. It may be leftover fertilizer. It could be the amount of nitrogen that accumulates due to nitrification. So as it rains, nitrate starts washing through the profile. Cover crops reduce the total volume of water that leaches away through evapotranspiration. So this picture that you could see, I've kind of just circled how deep this radish taproot goes. For context, that's about 4 feet, and it definitely went way deeper than that in this soil pit. So cover crops can also reduce the amount of nitrate that's in this water before it washes away. And this is a concern. In my lab at Maryland, before I arrived, Dr. Weil and Dr. Hirsch documented a residual amount of nitrates in corn and soybean fields of about 115 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. And more than half of this is deeper than 90 centimeters in the soil profile. So they took this down to a 2 meter depth, and more than half of it was deeper than 90 centimeters. So this deep soil nitrogen is incredibly susceptible to leaching at the start of the groundwater recharge season. So if there isn't a good cover crop that can get down and kind of chase this moving target, because, it's still going to leach deeper, you really need a cover crop that can get going to bring that up, prevent the leaching, and, make that available for next year. So I'm going to talk about 3 different experiments that we did and briefly go over each one. For experiment A, this is just drilling a mix at different times on small plots. So this was done over 4 site years, 2 years each year on a loamy sand and a silt loam soil. It was on fields where wheat was harvested in July, and then dairy manure was spread on the fields so that we had some nitrogen we could, observe as it goes through the profile. And the cover crop treatments, or 5 of them, consisted of a triticale, radish, and crimson clover mix. And this was no-till drilled on 4 different dates in the fall. And there was also a no cover crop control. So in this picture at the top right, you can just see what these plots look like next to each other. A picture was taken toward the end of October. This is a plot that was planted beginning of October and one that was planted mid-September. Even though it's the same mix, you could see it's much more diverse at this point in time for the one that was planted earlier. And we measured cover crop biomass and nitrogen uptake in December and pour water nitrate using 1 lysimeter per plot. And we estimated the total drainage volume and nitrate leached using the Food and Agriculture Organization method from Allen 1998. So I just got 2 take-home messages from this experiment. The first one, because this is a very mechanistic experiment, and the results are as you might expect. So when you plant earlier, you get more biomass. So these two lines just show the average of the two silty sites in purple, the average of the two sandy sites in green. And both these were highly significant. So using a no-till drill consistently, planting earlier consistently increased biomass. And not only that, but with greater biomass came greater nitrogen accumulation in the cover crop. And this accounted for nearly all of the variation in the cumulative amount of nitrate that was leached. It accounted for between 92 and 93% of the variation in nitrate leached. So again, straightforward experiment, very mechanistic. Plant earlier, you get more biomass. You get more biomass, you get less nitrate that's leached. All right, so the next experiment, after we have this very simple mechanistic drilling experiment, now we want to make it more practical. So we started interseeding into standing soybeans, and we chose to do this just prior to leaf drop when most of the leaves were yellow. We used a mix of rye, radish, and crimson clover, and we compared it to a more standard practice of just drilling that mix after soybean harvest and a no-cover control. So for context, there was about a 3 to 4 week difference between the time that the interseeding was done and the drilling was done. And we measured again biomass, nitrogen uptake, nitrate leached over time. So these two graphs just show the cumulative amount of estimated nitrate that leached over time. For graph A, that was from the loamy sand. Graph B, that's from the silt loam. The blue line, that's the one that was interseeded. The red line was drilled, and the black line's no cover. So on the silt loam, we had very low nitrate concentrations overall, and there wasn't much nitrate leaching that occurred. We found no difference between these three treatments. However, on the loamy sand, there's a very coarse soil. Leaching was very high through it. And so we found that the early interseeded cover crop reduced the amount of nitrate that was leached. Compared to the one that was drilled after harvest, that one did not reduce the amount of nitrate leached compared to no cover. And the reason being that, the one that was planted late, it started getting cold. It couldn't get much growing degree days accumulated. You're talking about a very small biomass by the time it went dormant. In terms of nitrate leaching, we might as well have not even had a cover crop for that experiment. But the one that was interseeded early did very well. And finally, for the third experiment I'll talk to you about, we actually worked with farmers on large commercial farms on the eastern shore of Maryland. So we used 18 fields over the course of 3 years. Each field was treated as an independent replicate. So this map just shows the experimental layout on a soil map. We randomly assigned each one of these treatments, and measurements were made at 4 different locations along a transect down the middle of each strip. So the extended treatment was interseeded by an airplane into either standing corn or soybean in the fall, and it was also terminated late in the spring. The drilled treatment was the more standard method. Again, it was no-till drilled after corn or soybean harvest, and then a no-cover control. And again, we measured the same thing, cover crop biomass, nitrogen uptake, and nitrate leaching. So for this experiment, again, with greater biomass, we had less nitrate that was leached. However, the point that I want to make by putting these two graphs side by side is that the fall cover crop biomass had a much greater effect on the amount of nitrate leached than the spring cover crop biomass did. So, all these dots, they're from the same lysimeters, cumulative amount of nitrate leached throughout the season. It's just on the x-axis, are we looking at fall cover crop nitrogen uptake or spring? And we have a much stronger relationship when we sample the fall biomass instead of the spring. And the reason being that the cover crop does its job in the fall. Yes, you may have a nice stand of a cover crop in the spring, but that's not when it's going to be reducing the amount of nitrate leached, because odds are that a lot of nitrate has already been leached. In the fall, before the cover crop goes dormant, that's when it does its job. Some conclusions: increasing cover crop biomass increases the benefits. Nitrate leached is primarily affected by the fall cover crop biomass. Cover crops affect nitrate leach by reducing both nitrate concentrations in the leaching water and reducing total leaching volume. And these conclusions, I'm going to say they're relevant to places that are in similar climates. There's probably some minutiae that are different for the Midwest. And I'll take questions later and go ahead and give this back to Anne.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nathan. All right. So next up, we have a colleague of mine at the University of Wisconsin Extension, Gulang Liu. He is an outreach specialist in the agricultural water quality program here. And he's going to be talking a little bit about nitrate leaching, but also about a calculator that's been developed here by partners in Wisconsin to help calculate or estimate nitrate leaching that can be done with hand in hand with producers. So I will stop sharing and hand it over to Gulang. Right, looks great.
Thank you, Anne. Again, thank you for the invite. And it has been great to listen to Nathan and Javi talk about their their research. And lysimeters are great. If we can have lysimeters in every farmer's field, we will have way more data to come up with better solutions. And cover crops, Nathan, I really envy on those, but on those Northeast cover crop biomass over there. Um, but what I'm going to spend the next couple minutes talking about is how can we use a simple nitrogen budget tool to help us minimize nitrate leaching? Because I think having a tool that is farmer facing and easy to use is important in trying to communicate these science to our audience. Now, if we take a step back into the bigger picture of nitrate leaching reduction, right? That's why we're here. What do we see as a potential pathway to reduce nitrate leaching in general, especially on a field by field basis? So in practice, I would propose these following steps, and I'm using these cute foxes as our guideline for the structure of today's presentation. First, we will need to be aware of how much nitrogen there is in our fields that can be potential to risky losses. Then, after we gain the awareness of nitrate leaching, we can then set our goals of water quality realistically. And the third step, which leads back to awareness actually, is to keep innovating and stay consistent with this process. But what do I mean by nitrate leaching potential? I'm very surprised that we haven't talked about nitrogen cycle, our beloved nitrogen cycle today. But here's a closer look at how that nitrogen cycle works in the agricultural system. To most people, it is quite complicated, is a quite complicated cycle to understand in a short amount of time. But what if we provide a different lens at looking at this cycle? Essentially, nitrogen cycle, as we understand, is a set of transformations of different forms of nitrogen among atmosphere and soil and water in our ecosystem, right? If we focus on the forms of nitrogen in this cycle, it might look something like this. Everything is circled. Now, as we understand in the law of conservation of mass, we can speculate that in this system, we can build a nitrogen balance with input, output, and changes in the nitrogen storage within the soil. As a result, we can put all of these different forms of nitrogen into these three different categories. Within nitrogen input, we have the form of nitrogen in commercial fertilizers, crop residue, manure, compost. You'll also find nitrogen in rainfall as well as irrigation. In terms of nitrogen output, a major part of it comes out of our fields from crop harvest. Where I live in central sands of Wisconsin, you would have corn and potatoes removing a decent amount of nitrogen from the fields. Another huge part of nitrogen output also comes back to the gaseous losses. Last but not least are the changes in the nitrogen storage within the soil. Now, nitrogen in the soil is usually in the form of organic nitrogen or ammonium or nitrate. Now, where does the law of conservation of mass come in is that these three categories actually form into an equation where you can take the output and the changes of nitrogen in storage from nitrogen input, and that would be what we call as leachable nitrogen. This is an important concept because as we have these conversations on water quality improvement with the decision makers, whether a farmer or a conservation professional, it's always hard to quantify or visualize and to get on the same page with the person you're talking to. And granted, this is a simple budget. Um, this is a simple budget model for nitrogen. And like every model, it has limitations. With this number, however, we can at least start an estimation with a reference to the specific field condition that you're probably having this conversation on top of. Now, how do we actually do this calculation of leachable nitrogen? Now, Anne has already given my presentation away, is that we're going to use this calculator, which is developed by Dr. Masaryk in UW-Stevens Point, that basically uses this concept, uses this equation, and then built it into a free website. So this is what the website actually look like. This is a free user-friendly tool that uses the Meissner-Randall simple nitrogen budget model, and it provides a platform for our users to put in field data and then estimate nitrate leaching potential on that specific field. The beauty of this tool is simplicity and transparency. You can find the reference tables that are used in this tool right in this website in case you're interested in the assumptions and the reference numbers that are used in this model. This is what it looks like in the field management tab, where you can input environmental factors and other conditions, as well as multiple management scenarios with specific yield and the crop you're growing within that field. After you put in those relevant information, you will have this live calculated nitrogen balance where you can find partitioning of each part of the nitrogen cycle in the estimated form. You can also identify the potential leachable nitrogen from these management scenarios using the cropping system that you just described on top of the screen. So now you may ask, why should I use the calculator, right? Is this just another model that educators are going to use and nobody's going to adopt? Well, we should use the calculator because the leachable nitrogen number is actually a great anchor point to start this goal setting process with your audience. I speak about this from my first person experience working with farmers, hosting workshops, and then it is really interesting to see how the farmers respond to this number using their own field management data. And then it is easy to use, and that's very important when you're working with our audience. And as I said, it starts this conversation that should be more important than the tool itself to help us understand how people apply nitrogen and where are some barriers and opportunities for us to improve the practices. So let's use this as an example. If we use the calculator, and this is the situation that we're in right now, where the leachable nitrogen is 75 units in 2024. Now, this will give us an opportunity to look at what are the inputs, what are the yields, and what are the management practices that gave us the 75 pounds of nitrogen per acre as the leachable nitrogen. Now, as we all know, in this water work, it's going to take time. So why don't we use time as a concept to help our farmers plan and build these incremental steps to adopt a plan in mind in the future decade, let's say. So how can we reach our goal from 75 units to 25 units in the next 10 years? I think that's a very interesting question, and that's why I am an extension. but also how do we have these conversations specifically, right? So I just listed some of the questions that I have been using in having these conversations that should be candid, but also is in most cases very inspiring. Uh, I'm sure we'll share the slides after the presentation, so we'll move on at this point. The calculator also provides an opportunity for us to answer some of these questions that may come up during the conversation. How does reducing nitrogen rate and maintaining yield affect leaching? How does planting a nitrogen scavenger cover crop affect nitrogen leaching? And how does adding a grass in my crop rotation overall affect leaching? And you will have way more questions in these conversations, but that is the point of having this tool as the anchor to have these important conversations. Before I leave you with the with where we can find this calculator, uh, let me just reinstate that this is more of a hindcasting tool than the forecasting tool, which means that after this conversation will likely happen after a whole cropping year ended, where the farmer will have all the data with yield as well as the management practices that they apply during the season. And this is a tool to incentivize reflection rather than prediction. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend you to use this tool to predict what will likely happen in the next year, but more like a checkpoint conversation tool by this time next year to think about how did we do in terms of water quality for the past year. Again, this won't be the silver bullet, but a good foundation for the long-term conversation for these relationships that we are building in the long term. And I'm glad Javed mentioned the concept of stacking practices, and let's keep these long-term goals in mind as we're thinking about stacking practices as well. This is my contact information and where you can find the calculator in our program's website, and I'm sure we'll have some time for questions and conversations. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Gulong. All right. So we do have some questions coming in. I see Javid, you are actually answering some. We might go over those verbally just to ensure that they do get recorded for folks that are watching afterwards. So this question, I think I'm going to dive in specifically for Nathan. Ed is curious, why was the R2 for biomass so much lower compared to the well-fitted R2 for N leaching? I think that's a question specifically getting at your findings in regard to that biomass.
Yeah, so for the biomass slides, I assume this is in reference to the Eastern Shore experiment where I showed the R squareds for the fall and the spring biomass.
I think, yeah, because he's also asking about that Eastern Shore, if the poultry litter was used instead of dairy manure, or was it instead of synthetic N?
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I'll answer both in terms of the Eastern Shore. So for that experiment, we were working on real commercial farms, and we didn't ask the farmers to change any of their practices apart from setting up this cover crop experiment. So a lot of the nitrogen that was applied was from the previous year's corn. You know, you might be talking about UAN. Some of them did put down poultry litter. We didn't put any limitations on that. And now, as far as why was the R squared so much lower for the spring biomass than for the fall? That's because the spring biomass didn't have nearly as much of an effect on the amount of nitrate leaching as the fall did. The cover crops, when they're actively growing in fall, that's when they're really cleaning up the soil profile before that nitrate can start leaching away.
Yeah, absolutely. That goes back to kind of some of your core results. I also see a question here from Ben in regards to you, so I'm just going to stay asking you this question before we move on to others. What soil types or hydrology types are you seeing most with that research? Just to get a better idea, since you are outside of our region, to make sure that we're all talking about something similar?
Yeah, so as far as the hydrological classes go, we've got some that are really well drained, sandy loams. We've also got some that are poorly drained. Speaking specifically of where I am right now, we've largely got two types of soils. One is from the coastal plain deposits, we were talking about almost entirely sand all the way down. And the other soil type is largely from the Great Dismal Swamp being drained. So you're talking now about really mucky, thick organic matter silt loam. It's, probably less clay than you guys are used to dealing with, but also, retains water really well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's an interesting topography down there. This question is for Javid, and I know you answered it, but hoping you can go over it verbally for us. For the Northeast Nebraska field investigation, if the cost of the nitrogen fertilizer top is considered at a suboptimal application rate, then how does the profitability factor in based on the suspected cost differences of the different nitrogen fertilizer types?
Sure. So we are calculating the cost differences or profitability based on the crop yield response. So if you are, for example, using both same type of, if you are using the same rate, optimal nitrogen rate with both nitrogen sources, then definitely the cost for the uh, fertilizer with the enhanced efficiency fertilizer would be higher, right? But it depends on the yield response, and that's what we found, that the yield was better with enhanced efficiency fertilizer. So then there was more profitability with enhanced efficiency fertilizer. But the question regarding, this question was regarding like how if we are comparing optimal nitrogen rate with conventional nitrogen source and suboptimal nitrogen rate with enhanced efficiency fertilizer. Again, we in our calculation we will consider the direct cost for the fertilizer and for the crop. So based on that, we will calculate the profitability. I'm not able to hear you, Annie. You are muted.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you. And I see another question for you is someone's asking what's the basis of that optimal N rate? And so maybe that would be helpful. I do know that different states have different resources in terms of figuring that out.
Oh, yes. So we actually use UNL nitrogen calculator to calculate the optimal nitrogen rate before the start of the experiment. And then we also had different nitrogen rates, six different nitrogen rates, where we calculated the crop yield response and we calculated EONR, and it was 230 pounds nitrogen per acre. So it was very close. The actual ENR from the nitrogen rate for those sites, for that year, was very close to what was predicted by our UNL nitrogen calculator.
Great. Thank you. Uh, Ruling, this question is for you. Does the budget tool or any of the field experiments compared in leaching with tilled or non-tilled fields?
That's a great question. I don't think the calculator is capable of doing that comparison. But I'm sure there has been studies on comparing tiled versus untiled. What, and I'm sure other speakers on the panel can provide some follow-up answer as well. But in terms of monitoring the tile drainage, nitrate concentration, and the lysimeter measured concentration, there is a difference in terms of that methodology. So I think I'm usually aware of that difference, and um, as long as I think you're conscientious of that difference, it will lead to a better conclusion. But I guess no is the answer.
Okay, great. And we have tiled. Sorry about that. I'm reading pretty fast here. Um, David is curious if field-specific groundwater monitoring does not match the model predictions, and he's saying predictions, and you mentioned that at the end that it's more of a what was that term looking backwards than forward,
Mhm.
field monitoring wrong, or have you been in situations where you're having to reconcile that difference when it is being monitored?
Yep, absolutely. There are two examples that I'm thinking of right now, especially in the state of Wisconsin. Um, we had equilibrium pan-lysimeter studies in Arlington, which has a heavier soil silt loam, and in Hancock, or central Wisconsin in general, that has a loamy sand soil, that has a lo loamy sand soil texture. So we're now trying to ground truth how is the budget tool compared to the lysimeter studies, and we have seen that in the sandier soils because pretty much everything drains within the sands. The model is working really well. In terms of a heavier soil texture, when we look at the entire crop rotation, the budget model has a pretty good estimation. But if you look at specific annual estimation, you might see some deviation from the estimated numbers.
Okay, that's interesting context. Thanks for that. This question I'm probably going to send to all three of you. This is from Nicole, and she's wondering about work conducted for nitrate leaching from CAFOs on manure spreading. I think that question came about to Javid, but I would kind of put it to all three of you that if you know of pertinent research they should be looking at specifically for nitrate leaching from CAFOs.
Um, so I'm not aware about that specific research, but we are currently conducting a research where we are evaluating the impact of manure management with different practices like cover crop or mulch. And then we are comparing that with inorganic synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. So that research is going on, but I am not sure about research that specifically addresses CAFOs.
Any, Will or Nathan, any insight into what direction they can look into? I know in Wisconsin, there might have been some with the karst landscape or topography, but I'm not sure the exact author to look up. Any tips?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with any research on nitrate leaching from CAFOs as well.
Yeah, I think in the context of Wisconsin, we don't have any nitrate leaching monitoring from manured fields yet. But I know a couple of researchers are actively writing grants to hop on that wagon.
Okay. Seems like a new area to look at. Um, so Greg is curious. He mentioned, this is for you, Long, that one of your references is a little older. So some N content for N might have declined over time, as an example, or change, other crops may have changed. Can the N content of crops be adjusted in the calculator?
That's a great question. We were just me and the not the yeah, I guess the creator of the calculator, Kevin, we're just talking about this last week, and we realized that the core numbers are actually different according to some of the newly published numbers. So we are actively working on changing some of the numbers. And I live in central Wisconsin where a lot of potatoes are being grown. We also noticed that there might be a difference in different varieties of potatoes when it comes to building your nitrogen budget. So there, because the tool is a R shiny tool, so it will have the possibility for us to adjust those numbers very easily and just republish the website. So yeah, that's a great question. Thank you.
Well, another question for you, Dylan. Um, so this is from Mark. Sorry if I missed this, but is the amount of nitrate in groundwater or any water source considered as a component in the model when the water is used as an irrigation source? And maybe that's a little bit different as well, considering irrigation is not as common up here.
Yeah, so that is a great question. In the calculator itself, if you go to the website, you will see that there is a irrigation tab. and it has the parenthesis, of course, as if applicable, right? So if you do have irrigation, you can test that irrigation water. Usually in the central sands, the nitrate concentration in irrigation water within the year doesn't fluctuate that much. So you can take a sample, test out the nitrogen concentration within that sample, and use that concentration as well as the total amount of irrigation you applied, say in 2024. And then you will be able to add that as part of the nitrogen input budget um, in the system. Yeah.
Okay, interesting, thanks. This question might be to all three of you. I'd be curious, is there any overall information that documents how nitrate concentrations have changed through time? Looks like this is from Nicole, and she's specifically looking at Wisconsin or Minnesota for overall trends in relation to the implementation of BMPs. Which ones have been slow to be effective? Looks like there's a little bit of conversation there back and forth, but this is certainly a question that's interesting to a lot of folks. Any thoughts from y'all?
So we have seen in Nebraska how the trend has been for nitrate leaching over time. But we have specifically not seen the effect of different BMPs um, on reducing nitrate leaching. Though what we are seeing that in some areas where there has been changes in furrow irrigation to sprinkler irrigation, we are really seeing decrease in nitrate concentration over time. And specifically, we have data actually from our natural resource districts that we have in our areas. So they are having that data over time, how when those BMPs were implemented and how there was a change in trend. So we are seeing those trends, and even in some areas where the in-season nitrogen recommendations was encouraged or implemented in our phase areas. We have different phase areas where the producers are supposed to follow the in-season nitrogen recommendation with certain recommendations from UNL and NRD. So we are seeing a trend of decreasing nitrate leaching in some of those areas. So yeah, in Nebraska we have seen some of that, but we don't have any publications for that.
Okay. Long or Nathan, anything to add on this?
So, in the Mid-Atlantic region, our primary focus for BMPs is to protect the health of the Chesapeake Bay. We have a whole bunch of nonprofits that are dedicated to that, and they'll usually release like report cards on the health of the bay in terms of, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediments. Those are the three big pollutants that we're worried about. In terms of progress by BMPs, I don't know if they're able to trace it back to specific BMPs, but I know that we have a lot of incentives. We pay farmers for implementing BMPs, and part of the requirement in order to get that funding is you have to submit a nutrient management plan. So, in that sense, the state has data on when BMPs have been implemented by farmers. I'm just not sure if anyone's, done the tracking of how much money spent on BMPs, how many farmers are doing it, and then the ultimate effect on the groundwater in the bay.
Yeah, and in terms of Wisconsin's context, I'm going to speak strictly to nitrate and groundwater. If you want to find out how the nitrate levels in private groundwater wells have fluctuated over the years, there's a great tool by UW Stevens Point, Center for Watershed Education called Water Viewer. And then you can go to that website to find statewide data about the nitrate levels within private wells. And there is a specific feature called nitrate trends where a bunch of counties, I think, collected nitrate levels consistently over a decade, I think. And then you can find some trends there. In terms of practices, I think Wisconsin's still at the early stage of collecting that practice data in terms of like, did you plant cover crops? How successful is the cover crop? Because that matters a lot when it comes to reducing nitrate leaching. So I would say we're still at the early stage of that. but I hope in the future we can start collecting those information and then eventually correlate that with the groundwater quality that we hope to quantify and reduce in the future. I mean, improve in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up. I did just put a link to that well water quality viewer that Gulang mentioned in there that you can look at. Obviously, that is just for Wisconsin, but certainly could be interesting. Another name I know you were asking for Wisconsin and Minnesota, but in Nebraska could be Troy Gilmore, who I know has been studying some of that work as well, and I'm sure is a collaborator with UAB. So I want to first off thank our speakers. It looks like we are running out of time to answer any more questions. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to throw up on the screen all three of our speakers' email addresses. So please feel free to take that down and reach out to them individually if you have additional questions that we weren't able to answer today. I really appreciate all three of our speakers for taking time to share a little bit about their work. As we take a closer look at this issue, that is certainly not going anywhere, right? It's kind of one of the wicked problems as we look at how these BMPs are working, what are the different impacts we're having, and trying to get more granular as kind of Nicole was searching out. So thank you everyone for being here today. I hope you can join us for a future edition of the current webinar series. In December, we're going to be talking about climate smart agriculture. So I hope you all can join us, and thank you so much. Be sure to check our website, northcentralwater.org, for our recording and the slides. Thanks again to Gulang, Yavid, and Nathan for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the invite, Anne.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, everyone.